For this session, we're going to talk about how to keep a networking conversation going. So successful networking can be lots of things, but at the heart of it, successful networking is that point of connection between you and someone that you wanted to meet, where you're having a good conversation, a meaningful conversation, where you're able to take away some of the experiences that you want to learn about and leverage as part of your efforts, your career development, your professional development. So when you're having these interactive conversations, you've done a lot to get here, or you've identified what questions that you've identified people who may have answers to those questions, you've established a way to connect with them, which sometimes is hard because schedules are hard to manage. And then you've had or you're having an engaging conversation where you're sharing information about yourself and learning information from this other person. This is one scenario. Obviously, in person, you can have lots of benefit from conversations that happen virtually in our current world. It's an easier way to set up conversations with people who are across the world. So these are all fantastic outcomes to the networking process. But then the question is, right, so in that moment in time, it's all great, but then it ends and the person leaves and you hang up the Zoom call, and then you're left wondering what to do next, because obviously you can't just keep going back to the same person with more and more questions out of the blue, because that person's going to be like, no, I can't. I'm not your only person out here, and I don't have all the answers. So for some people, you have an interaction, and then 6 months down the line, you're like, well, I didn't do anything with that because I didn't know what to do to sort of maintain that conversation. It was a good conversation, but I didn't want to take up too much of their time. Lots of reasons to sort of be thoughtful about other people's times and spaces. So let's talk about some general best practices, then I think that will be helpful for you. Step one, I would say, is the thank you email. This is fundamental to everything from networking to interviewing, that once you've had a significant interaction with someone, you want to then immediately respond with a thank you email that really puts into context why it was helpful and cements that you found it valuable. It doesn't have to be a long email, but it sort of has to capture some nuances of the experiences that you had, so that demonstrates that you were there and were paying attention to that experience. So the general rule of thumb that I have is you definitely want to send your thank you email within a sort of a 24-hour window after that experience, be that a networking interaction or an interview in this case. But you don't want to do it in the first 30 minutes after an interaction, or the first couple of hours even, because it seems a little bit over the top when you've just left a session by saying, thank you so much, this has been so helpful, I really appreciate it. And then you hang up and then you type an email that says, thank you again, it was really helpful. Right? It's just too many thank yous in a row. So you want just a little bit of buffer between the interaction and your email, but no more than about 24 hours. Otherwise you'll forget and they'll forget and you'll lose that sort of momentum. So this is sort of just an example of an email that's out there, right? And it identifies what was valuable about the conversation, which is helpful for the person to know. They like to feel valued. It also identifies a next step, because suddenly you could, after meeting with someone, just connect with them on LinkedIn, and that is sort of a point of interaction. But by asking, you're sort of keeping the conversation going, and it's an easy answer for someone, right? It doesn't require them a lot of their time to say, sure, please do. But it's a way of making sure that that conversation transfers from, let's say, an in-person interaction to then a sort of a virtual space over email, right? So it's a different medium, but it's a different type of interaction, which is part of your relationship building strategy. So this is just an example. Obviously, you can write your own versions that sort of integrate your own content, but very helpful just to cement that you are looking for ways to connect into the future, right? It's not just a one and done experience. You're trying to find ways to then project that moving forward. Now we're going to come back to this thank you in a bit, but let's talk about other ways that we can then leverage this. So if you're asking permission to connect on LinkedIn, they don't actually have to give you that permission for you to connect, right? So if you say, can I connect on LinkedIn, and they don't respond, I wouldn't consider that to be a no. I would then move to the connecting on LinkedIn as your next engagement, whether or not you heard from them. The idea of asking them, as I said, is just a strategic way of keeping that conversation going. It doesn't mean that no answer means definitely not, I don't want to connect with you, because they still have an opportunity to not connect with you on LinkedIn, even if you do reach out. In general terms, a rule of thumb I think that's helpful on LinkedIn is not to connect with people that you haven't yet interacted with, right? You may find lots of people on LinkedIn like, hey, this is a great person, and you may be tempted to connect with them, but there's no necessarily reason why they want to connect with people that they don't know. So if you've had an interaction with someone, then it's a wonderful way to sort of build on that with a connection on LinkedIn. There's another approach on LinkedIn that you can follow people. Following people, you can follow anyone, even if they're outside of your network in most cases, and that allows you to sort of see the things that they are talking about, but you're not then part of their network yet. So that's a sort of an initial step that you can take, even if you're not connecting with them. Now on LinkedIn, as you're looking at that, the connect button is always the biggest button. It's like always the most tempting button to press. It's always that connect. But you don't, as I said, don't want to do that unless the person actually knows you. So as I said, that you can do that. There's nothing stopping you. It's just a best practice not to necessarily to do that. If you want to follow people, you go to the more button, and then you'll see follow as one of the options there. And then the people who are followed can see who's following them in general terms. I can look through all the people following me, and they're across the spectrum of different roles and countries and industries. So some people just are following you for they're interested in what you're doing, or they don't know why you may be interesting, right? So it's just prospective pre-connecting, as it were. But the connecting obviously is an option that you can take moving forward. Now, when you do click on the connect button, you're going to get the option to send an invitation to someone and personalize a note. And definitely you want to do this, right? Even if you just met the person and they say, sure, connect with me on LinkedIn, you always want to add a note. Otherwise, it's the generic, Joseph Barber wants to connect with you on LinkedIn, right? And it's very unsatisfying. So this was Alyssa. Alyssa used to work in our office. We were still secondary connections. I hadn't yet connected. So I took this opportunity to connect with Alyssa as part of this workshop prep. But the note then provides you an opportunity to have 300 characters to be able to remind them that you met with them, right? So just a reminder that we met at the conference. I enjoyed chatting with you. I'm looking forward to connecting on LinkedIn, right? So again, you want to provide some context to that so that they don't get confused. I get a lot of invites from people that I have no connection with that provide no context. And obviously I'm not going to go looking for the reason that they want to connect with me, because I won't know what that is. But these invitation notes are going to be a critical part of that process. You only have 300 characters or so you have to be, it's a small ask, right? It's not a long monologue, but it's a very helpful way of doing that. Once you have connected, there are lots of things that you can do with that connection that can keep the conversation going in slightly different ways, right? So Claire, again, used to work in our office here at Penn's Career Services. She's a first degree connection, so I have connected with her. She has 500 plus connections. Now, if I were to reach out to Claire and just say, hey, Claire, do you happen to know anyone who works in the biopharma field? Claire would have to sort of sit there for a while and go, oh, maybe, and she would have to think, and then she'd maybe remember one or two people. What I can do, being a first degree connection, this is why is one of the benefits of being a first degree connection, is I can click on those 500 plus connections, that hyperlink there, and then I can see all of her connections, and I can filter it by various different things, from job title to company, and I can find people that Claire knows, right? These are all Claire's connections. So they're all my, in many cases, secondary connections. I know them, or I know them potentially because I know Claire. And then I can find people that I might want to have an additional conversation with. We can see Alyssa here at the bottom, it's pending because I just put that invitation out there. But what I can do with that then is I can say, oh, Claire knows this person, right? So Claire gave me information about career fields, and that was great, and I thanked her. She also knows this other person in another field who might be able to give me an additional insight. And then I may be able to leverage the fact that I know this now to reach back out to Claire and ask about that, right? So under the All Filters tab, when I'm looking at Claire's contacts, I can do a job title search. I can do industry search. I can search for different parameters to find those people. Claire is not going to remember all 500 people that she knows anyway. So if I asked her directly, she probably wouldn't come up with an up-to-date list. But LinkedIn obviously keeps those things up to date in the background. And then I can make an ask, right? And this is sort of the way to sort of leverage that ongoing communication with the contact that I made, in this case, Claire. I noticed that you're connected with Alyssa. I've been hoping to connect with someone at the American Cancer Society, which is where Alyssa was working or is working. Would you be able to help me start a conversation? Or can I use your name when I'm reaching out? Hey, Alyssa, we both know Claire. She said you'd be a great person to connect with. Right, so this is an easy ask. It's a low ask or low sort of energy requirement for the recipient of this to be able to help me. They may just write an email and they might say, yeah, go ahead and use my name. Or I think Alyssa's on vacation for the next 2 weeks. So you might want to come, reach out to her a few weeks later. So lots of ways that that interaction with Claire is going to be a great way of keeping that conversation going without Claire having to do too much more work or to answer a lot more questions that I've already asked her already as part of my original interaction. Then we have the sort of the follow-up where we're trying to make sure that we are taking the information that we were given from a networking interaction and actually doing something with it, as opposed to saying, oh, that was really helpful. So if we go back to this thank you email that I wrote in this hypothetical scenario, I said, I'll definitely take a look at the website that you mentioned. right? And that's great because if my initial contact mentioned a website, I can go look at that website, and then I can come back and I can say, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that resource with me. I really enjoyed it. Now that's all you can need to do, right? That's the sort of you're just updating them that something that they shared with you was helpful. You don't need them to respond to it. You don't need to do anything more than that. Keeping them updated on the progress that you're making using the advice that they gave you is a wonderful way of keeping the conversation going, because it keeps you top of mind in your contact's experience without them having to do anything. Now, you can also add a layer onto that by asking them a follow-up question, right? So, hey, I saw that this website had this. They described these tools. Hey, do you use those in your role, right? So it's an easy question that sort of connects to a resource that they shared, so that they have some stake in it already, right? You're not just putting a random website on and saying, hey, I saw this. What does this mean to you? So that's a great way of then keeping that conversation going by using information that they shared with you. And the same with the second part of the thank you, right? Thank you for suggesting I reach out to Amy. I'll go ahead and do that. Once you've gone ahead and had that conversation with this other connection that they shared with you, you can then circle back around and say, that conversation was amazing. Again, status updates, as it were, are perfectly good ways of keeping the conversation going because they don't require a response, but they will keep your existence top of mind from the reader's perspective. So this sort of, I think, connects to the question that was being asked in the chat. So what are good practices to ask for a referral during networking, especially when you don't know the person as well, when you're first meeting them? So certainly it's a question that you don't want to ask up front, right? You don't necessarily want to meet someone saying, hey, who else do you know, at the beginning of the conversation? But as you reach the end of the conversation and you're sort of thinking about what they shared with you, maybe they shared a bit of information that they say, this is another area that you can look into, or, I find this area particularly interesting, as part of your career development. That's something that you can look at. You can sort of pay attention to those sort of prompts and say, you mentioned this might be a good area to focus on. Do you happen to know anyone, from your network that would be great for me to reach out to? And I think that's perfectly fine to do in the conversation, even in the initial conversation, so long as it makes sense in terms of the context of what you're discussing, right? So it has to be connected to something that they've mentioned or said or pointed you towards. So it doesn't just feel like, this has been great. Who else? Who else can I speak to, right? So you don't want to make that sort of very abrupt change in narrative from this is amazing to no, I want someone else. If you do, don't cover the referral in that first interaction. As I said, it's a great way to then circle back around to appreciate them in that time. But then the next stage is to reach back out to them saying, hey, do you know anyone else out there? And so that way you don't blend the two narratives together. Number 5, commenting. This is very similar to the sort of the status updates that you're giving people in real time, is that you really want to make sure that you are active in a way that people can see you, right? The new contacts can see you. If you have first-degree connections on LinkedIn, you'll see that there's this bell icon in the top right-hand corner of their profile. This alerts you to every time your first-degree connections make a statement, a comment, an update, or anything, right? So you get a specific notification saying that they've done something. So if you've met with someone and you followed up with them and connected with them on LinkedIn, then you want to see what they're doing so that then you can respond to that in real time and maybe be part of their conversation in terms of their progress or research that they've done or jobs that they've taken or whatever that looks like. So in this case, for example, Thea here posted, I'm happy to say I'm starting a new position as a research assistant professor at Penn. And then in the example I'm sharing here, Nicole, who's one of their first-degree connections, commented on this and said, congratulations. And Thea said, thank you. Right, so it's a very easy call and response type of situation where someone says, I have this update. And then you just say, that's great. And they say, great, right? So this is the conversation happening now on LinkedIn. The interaction continues in that way. It's also worth noting that Nicole gets 2 mentions on this for, to a certain extent, for Thea's 1 mention. Thea says, I'm getting a new job. When I look at it on the LinkedIn feed screen, Nicole's name's first, then Thea's update, and then Nicole's question at the bottom. This is great just for being active on LinkedIn because the algorithms that sort of promote your profile to a broader audience are going to be dependent on how active you are. LinkedIn is not going to promote accounts that have been inactive and don't share or don't comment or don't do anything. There's no sort of benefit for them to do that. So even just for your own benefit, in terms of promoting your own brand, it's great to sort of be active here. But if Nicole had met Thea as part of a networking interaction, this would be a great way of obviously keeping that conversation going. I oversee a blog as part of my professional association and people write blog posts all the time, and then I try to sort of give it a boost through my network. And so I write a short paragraph that says, thank you for posting this. I really enjoyed this post because, and I add my own take on it to a certain extent. This is the blog post itself. Teaching is a key skill that can be applied to almost any job. When I post this one got 21 sort of comments or 22 comments and 2,000 plus basically views. And every time someone's viewing this, again, it's me and then the content out there as well. So as you are seeing people share their own updates or share their own resources or articles or whatever that looks like, you can be part of that narrative just by sharing it with your own network. Again, not only does it allow the person that you're connecting with to see that you're engaging with them, it also connects you to the content that they're sharing. Right? And if I look at the analytics, I have the premium LinkedIn thing. Otherwise, I can't do the roles that I do because I do so many searches. But you can see the reach that my share had across different industries and across different people out there. So it's just interesting to see how that can be beneficial to you as a networking strategy as a whole. And the same is sort of true with the sharing and liking aspects of LinkedIn, right? So anytime that someone shares a post that you're connected with, you can share that. You can like that further. Your name is always associated with it, but they always get a notification that you've shared it, right? And that's so key to making them feel like you're part of their network because you're always present and you're always engaging with them in slightly different ways. The true benefit to you is that you're always connected to the content, right? If you share something or like something, your name and the content go hand in hand. So regardless of whether you're trying to keep a conversation going or just trying to be sort of branding yourself to be connected with a certain type of content that you want to be associated with your brand, this is a really great way of doing that. And then sort of updating yourself is sort of key, right? So once you're a first degree connection with someone, if you post something about yourself and about your own profile, about your own research, they will see that as your first degree connection in their feed, right? Your feed is the sort of the first page that you come onto LinkedIn, that long, endless scroll of people saying things and doing things. It prioritizes feeds from your first degree connections or from organizations or companies that you're following. So then as you are promoting yourself, Fatima here used to work at Penn Square Services. She's a wonderful promoter of her work, right? She's always sharing what she's doing, what she's thinking, what that looks like. If you're presenting a poster, we talked about that in the last session. If you've published a paper, every time that you share, it's likely that your new contacts will see that. And it's much the same as responding to their updates. It allows them to respond to yours if they want to, but it keeps you top of mind. And that's so critical to making them feel like, as I said, you're present in the conversations. So, these are just great examples of people marketing and promoting themselves, advocating for themselves through networking as a way to make sure that their networks know what they're doing and how they're doing it and knowing that they're valuable. Because probably one of the reasons that you're making connections with people is that you may be interested in the work that they're doing, or they're interested in working at their organization, right? And so being able to share content so that they can see that and their colleagues can see that to a certain extent, allows you to sort of make an impact on them that may position you for a role that you're applying to moving forward. So it's a long-term strategy. These are things that you keep doing over time, but a great way of sort of keeping the conversations going as you're sort of navigating through that process. From the PhD career training platform, the How to Build and Grow Your Network is a wonderful tool or a wonderful video that sort of talks about what you're doing here. It's, the networking is never just a point in time. It's always spread over different aspects of your professional growth. Building relationships during your PhDs and postdocs as another example of a session that you'll find valuable as part of that.